Hold up.
Hello and welcome to the Say Yes Movement podcast with Heather and John. Hey Heather, how's it going?
It's going good. It's going good. Okay, just before we jumped on, we said, what are we going to talk about today? And we already got into like a really important topic. Are we going there today, John? Are we talking about communication, but in a
totally going there today for sure, because it's I don't know. So I don't know if I don't have a little censor button, so we're gonna have to be careful with the language we use throughout this thing, because I feel like there's a lot of passion behind this particular topic and conversation. And it's still in and around the theme of communication. For those of you that are listening in, we're still talking about communicating, but the question is, how are you communicating and what's actually coming across? Because the one thing that we had like a really heated, I wouldn't say heated, but I want to say passionate discussion on is really how, workplaces are describing and listing things as descriptors for groups inside of their organization. That was just one of the things that we were mentioning. I just want to say good morning, Mohammed. Thank you for joining us. This is going to be a fun one.
It's going to be a fun one. It's going to be a fun one. So let's get a little bit more specific, John. So we're talking about the labels that are placed on groups within organization to highlight what they do and who they're supporting. But those labels themselves can actually deter or do the opposite. And so, for example, if you have a women's network in your organization, does that invite men to come to your event? And the name itself does not. And in fact, there was a time when men weren't able to come, and then slowly they were able to come to, and this is our experience, John. You're often in rooms where it's just women and women are, it's supporting for women. Why do you go to those events, John? What's the event?
Yeah, no, you're right. So just to kind of preface, so you're right. There were, when I was in an organization, it was a women's group, and it was primarily just for women. I went because I was invited to go give a talk on storytelling, which was really neat, but I was the only guy in the room. Myself and I was co-delivered this presentation with another gentleman, Tim. And, I ended up starting to go to these events. Number one, at the onset, I felt that it was an exclusive club, right? Like it was just not for me, not for the guys around me. And I started going, they opened up the doors and said, hey, yeah, no, for sure. It's open to men as well. I started going just to get a better understanding of what were some of the topics that people were talking about, right? Like what's actually happening out there. I believe in having a different level of understanding. So the only way to understand is to put yourself in the shoes of the people that are going through the issues that are out there. So I just went for an awareness. I went for learning. I went to, just for myself, it was a personal development as well. I got to see the world from a different perspective that I normally don't get to step into. And, being born and raised European male, doing blue collar work, it wasn't the sensitivity and all those things that we talk about today. Just, it wasn't a thing for us. Right. So it really started to shape my perspective. And it's part of the reason why I continue to be in rooms with, I'm the only guy or one of the few men in the room, just because I have that level of understanding. And even when I talk, like when I give my talks and my presentations, the one thing I always get from women is you seem non-threatening. And, that to me is like, ooh, progress. I've made some progress. I'm no longer, viewed and seen this way. Right. And, it wouldn't have been possible if I didn't just start to appreciate what was actually happening.
Well, you're not the first person that I've heard that says it feels like it's just for women, and at what time it was, and it's moved on to be leadership development. But unfortunately, let's just name it as it is. There is still a need for women supporting types of events in the workplace to help women and all marginalized groups get to that next level. And because there's been such a deficit for so many years, we're trying to catch up, and the catch up is what we're doing. And so it ends up doing the opposite. And the opposite is that it ostracizes men from participating, because we're trying to give that extra lift up for women in marginalized groups, but it's having the wrong effect. And how do we navigate that effect that it's having on, do you feel comfortable going into those rooms and those learning environments? You do, John, but there's lots of allies that don't. In fact, there was a presentation that I did once, and an executive asked me, is your presentation gender neutral? And it took me back. Like, I was really offended by that statement, because I got labeled in that moment as, pro women, and that the tone of the question was, then am I against men? And I'm for fair and equal event. And anybody could come to the event. But we were really welcoming to lots of people coming. But my conversation was, or my teaching was, gender neutral, but the audience that we were trying to elevate was for women, but anyone could come to the event. So that question sat with me. It still sits with me. It was years ago that this happened. And it sat with me because I put a meaning on it, that I was then labeled as someone who is an advocate for women and not for men. And it was really, really awful to have that feeling. No, I'm an advocate for everyone to be elevated to the best version of themselves. That's what both of us teach. That's what I stand for. So my values were really, really hurt. But I also know that women need that extra support. When I think back in my career, John, there was no groups. There was no person that I could look up to that looked and sounded like me in leadership positions. And that's still happening today. Women of color, marginalized groups, they don't have someone to look up to. And that's why these groups are so important. But these groups also have to realize that they're creating another persona that may actually not help the situation. It might hurt it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And yeah, maybe listen, I'm not the right guy to talk about this, because I don't fit into those categories of marginalized groups. But you and we were talking about this before. I never felt, for me personally, right? I never felt like I was, to me, people are people, right? And yes, there was a transition and a growth that I went through to come to the point where it just doesn't matter. You're right. Like gender neutral conversations. Like, what does that even sound like? I don't even know. Like, you're gonna grow people. You're gonna grow talent. It doesn't matter the sex. It doesn't matter the gender. Like, it just, you're growing talent, right? Like, that's the way I always saw it. And I don't know. Like, I struggle with this. Like, maybe it's just me, right? And maybe it's just my perspective of the world and who I am, and what I'm going through and what I've experienced. But I've never, listen, I never got it. Like, it's just, I'm like, okay, people are people, right?
John, I love you. So this is said with love, but that is such a white guy thing to say right now. How does that land for you?
Yeah, no, it doesn't land too nicely. I'll be honest, I don't like that comment, but
and let me give you a little bit more explanation, because you haven't had the experience of what other people have. And this is true for every single human being on the planet. We've never walked in someone else's shoes. We only have the experiences that we've had and the meaning we've put on it. So as a white male, you have never walked into a room and sat at a executive table where you were the only gender of your kind. And those are experiences that women have all the time still in the workplace. You've never walked into a workplace as a Black woman, like, these are just not your experiences. So I think the going back to what you were teaching when you went to that Women's Network event, storytelling, the more stories we tell, the more stories we share, we can actually then put ourselves in their position, try to see the world through their eyes. And, that is some of the work that I like to do. I like to tell these stories, not to say, look what someone did wrong, but to say, how can we do better? How can we actually see it through someone else's eyes and step into their shoes for a moment, to support, to curate good experiences, to help build trust, to, really build up leaders in the organization? Because here's what I believe. I believe this with my heart, that allies today don't know how to be the best allies. So, Jonna, and I've heard you actually go fit into this category. You want to be the best ally for trustworthiness, leadership, but you don't always know how.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. I don't always know how, because I don't always know everybody's experiences. But one of the things I do attempt to do or try, and this is something that we've learned in NLP, is really stepping into somebody else's shoes, right? And before even, as I communicate, and this is one of the things that we're going to talk about in our workshop as well, when I'm looking to communicate or talk to a group, whether it's my own team, whether it's a group of total strangers, it's really around stepping into their shoes for a second and really trying to see the world from their perspective. We call it second and third position instead of NLP, but it's really around, how do they see the world to the best of our abilities that we can, right? And sometimes this involves a conversation. Sometimes it involves, hey, what's really happening? What's your perspective? Sometimes you get that opportunity to do that. But even if you can just imagine what it would be like to step into somebody else's shoes for a second, you start to see the world differently. You start to see it through their eyes, and you start to, maybe you don't get to experience all the pain that they've gone through at certain moments in their lives, but you do get to see the perspective a little bit. And I think this has been one of those things that have really helped me, especially when I get up on stages and I speak. It's never about me, right? I check my ego at the side of the door. I don't bring that on stage with me. It's never about me when I'm, speaking with people, and even inside of leadership, it's never about me, right? That's the way I treated it, and everybody has their own perspective and their own way of doing things, but it was never about me. It was always about the people, because I knew and actually there's science and data and stats that are coming in around this. When you look after your team, this is when you start to hit great success, right? And even little things like just taking credit for success. You don't, some of the great leaders that I've seen online today, they're giving it back to their team. They don't take it for themselves, right? I didn't do this, the team did, right? It's just, I don't know, like, it just, to me, it's like, why do we continue to do this? Why do we make it about ourselves, right?
And I think that the important factor here is our brains are all wired the same. Doesn't matter who you are, what your background is, and it's wired to create a meaning that is relevant to your experiences. So me and you may walk into the same room, and I actually am aware that I am, one of two other women in the room. And you have zero awareness that there is any difference if you follow your bouncing ball. And so we're both walking in with two different, that is not even on your radar, and it's completely on my radar. In fact, I'm also thinking, where am I going to sit? Who am I going to sit beside? Who are my allies in the room? So I've already done a 360 of the room to see who's my allies for the things that I want to do and say in that meeting, and who's going to support me, where that might not cross a male counterpart's mind at all. And so these conversations, these storytelling is not to say someone's done something wrong. It is to say, this is the meaning that I have, and I'd love to change that meaning, but it's what's happening right now, and just be really, really comfortable with those conversations happening. And some of the conversations are very, very uncomfortable, but the meaning is so, so important. And I'll share a story. So and I've shared pieces of this before, but I have nice hair. Okay. I just know that I have nice hair. And I actually know that because people come up to me all the time and ask me about my hair products, and they actually touch my hair. Strangers do. And I know, John, you think this is crazy, but
I think it's a little weird personally. Yes.
Well, the same situation happens with Black women. And the reason I know that is because many of my people have shared these stories with me, because Black hair, the texture is different, and people just go and touch their hair. And so it's very, very like in your space. And when I heard this story for the first time, I was like, wow, people touch my hair too. And what I had created this story that when people are touching my hair, I have really good energy because it's usually at events that are like, playful and dancing and,
Mm,
those kinds of things. Whereas Black women have people touching their hair in grocery stores, which is completely inappropriate. And
yeah.
so the story was similar, but completely not even the same. And of course, the meaning was different. I had equated that I have good energy. They'd equate it with you're in my personal space. And both are true. Both are true because
Yeah.
that's our experiences. But I had never even knew that this was an experience that someone else was having that was so negative and so in your face. And as I sit back and I see it, and the one lady that told me about this, it was actually someone touched their daughter. And like, imagine just some stranger in the grocery store touching your kid. Like, no, like hands off, lady, right? So, these experiences, the more we share, the more we can step into someone else's shoes. And I really honor that story because it gave me a new meaning for even my story. In fact, when I shared it with you, you're like, that's creepy. Why are people touching you? And I'm like, wow, I never made it creepy. I mean, let's be honest, there's creeps out there, but most of the time it's in a really good situation that's happened to me. And of course,
Yeah.
that's why I made it a good situation.
It's funny because the whole touching thing, I think, is you shouldn't be touching unless you have explicit consent to go touch, right? And one of the things, I think this. I photographed for a number of years, and one of the things I did is I would touch people to position them and do a bunch of different things, right? But I would always ask, "Is it okay? Can I do this? Can I just adjust here?" And I would try to keep my touching to a minimal. It felt awkward, but I knew that I wanted to get a certain perspective, a certain look, right? But yeah, you shouldn't be touching people. Yeah, and when you told me that, I'm like, what do you mean people just come up to you and touch your hair? It's like, what? Clearly, nobody's coming up to touch my hair, but
No, and that is a true statement, John. You would never even know that these experiences are happening out there to women until the storytelling happens. And that's what the invitation we're having is, are we having conversations about what our experiences are, what the meaning is that we put on them, and which ones are still difficult for us sometimes? And we're hearing from many of our clients right now that walking into the office, presenting at a presentation, talking up in meetings. This is a difficult situation. One, because we're just returning to the office, but there's all kinds of anxiety that's going on that's even a different level than it was before COVID. So, we have to be aware that many people are having even experienced leaders are having these moments. And this is why we chose to do the workshop on what's the date? The 27th. 27th.
Yeah.
We're going to do a 30-minute lunch and learn on confident communication. So important. Such a great conversation to have. And we want everyone to come. So, make it a lunch and learn with your teams. I guarantee you will walk away with 3 tips at minimum on how to be an effective communicator and also internalize some of the things that are happening in the workplace right now, different than you have an understanding today. And I think if we just create an environment where people can tell those stories, we're going to be true leaders in the organization.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'm seeing one of the comments. This is so tailored for me to say yes today on something I'm contemplating. Yes, thank you, Mohammed, for sharing that.
Actually, let me jump in, Moise. Whatever you need to do, whatever you need to say as a leader, I know that you are so respected and loved, and you do it with those 2 words, respect and love. So yes, it's time to step into your biggest shoes and do whatever you need to do today. People listen to you, people respect you, and I can't wait to hear what happens with what you say yes to. And David, thank you for letting us know. Yes, we want to tackle the uncomfortable conversations, the ones and I want to be honest, before we jumped on, me and John, we both had this moment where, is this really where we want to go today? And my comment was, we're the wrong color to have this conversation. Like we've covered the genders, but that's like a fraction of the conversation. Yeah. And the reason we said yes is, well, our podcast is Say Yes, but we said yes because if we're not talking about who is, if we're not being allies, then who is? If we're not creating these uncomfortable moments for people to step into, then who is? And if we really want to impact 1 million people this year, then we need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And so we said yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. All right. Now that I'm like getting all red and blushing, and yes, no, we thank you, David. Yes, no, absolutely. And our goal is really, impact, right? And impact people in a positive way that really starts to shift the perspective of what's happening out there in the world. So yeah, no, and you're right. There was a hesitation, when we first started, where like, are we really going to do this? And yes, we are. And we're going to continue to do this as we go throughout the rest of the week. So, takeaway, think about your perspective, think about stepping into somebody's shoes. And if you need to step into something today, say yes to it, step into it, and approach it from a place of love, approach it from a place of respect, approach it from a place of really just giving. And I think if you can do that, it starts to change the story and the dialogue. So, all right. I've been looking like I've been training hard for marathon. Yes, I have half marathon, which is part of the half Ironman. But thank you, Maz. Yes, I am getting there. Okay, so we are at the end of this session. We'll be back on Wednesday. We'll see where we take it. And I would love to continue this conversation because I know there's a lot of shifts and changes that are happening inside of organizations, especially with people going back into the office. There's a bunch of things that people need to consider and talk about.
And if something comes up, direct message us. We love hearing these stories, and we do talk about them anonymously on our podcast. So, if you've got a story to share, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So that is it for us today. Remember, when you shift your mindset, you shift your life. Wishing you all an amazing Monday. See you Wednesday. Take care, everybody.